Welcome to the Amateur Church Podcast, where we pursue excellence in ministry with the right motivation for the sake of love. I'm Pastor Matt, and I'm so thankful that you're on this disciples journey with me. We've been walking through 1 Samuel chapters 1 through 15 this week, and today we're looking at evangelism from these specific texts and chapters. I really want to jump right into the heart of these passages, 1 Samuel chapter 8, in which, as I've described it before this week, there is a shift, a change in all of Israel's history, moving from the time of the judges into an established monarchy. Now, if you'll remember from when we were reading in Deuteronomy and Exodus, that God actually talked through Moses, telling them there will be a time where you desire a king and it's not going to be well for you. In fact, Samuel speaks all these words from Deuteronomy and shares with them, hey, here's the process, here's the procedure. If you get a king, he will take your sons and put them in the army. He'll appoint for himself the commanders. He'll take your daughters. He'll take the best of your fields. He'll take a tenth of your seed as far as the taxes. He'll take your male servants and female servants and a tenth of your flocks. And yet they still cried out for this king. And so what I want to do is I really want to focus in on the motivation behind asking this request. Remember the context and the culture in that day. They were supposed to be a theocracy, not a monarchy, a theocracy in which God was their king. And yet they were rejecting God. God even says that. They've not rejected you, Samuel. They've rejected me. And in this theocracy, they were supposed to serve God, but they wanted a monarchy. They wanted a man, flesh and blood, that would sit upon a throne. And there is the motivation for this down in verse 20 of 1 Samuel chapter 8. Listen to these words. It says, verse 19 says, the people refused to listen to the voice of Samuel, and they said, no, but there shall be a king over us. And here's why, verse 20, that we also may be like the other nations, number one, that our king may judge us, number two, and go out before us and fight our battles, number three. Now, whether you realize this or not, the cry of their heart in this moment is really the cry of all of our hearts. I can use, and you can use this passage really to point people to the gospel of Jesus Christ. And you say, well, Matt, how can this passage be an evangelistic passage? Well, what we want to do in evangelism is we are sharing good news with people. We evangelize, we share the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ. And what you want to do many times is point them to the flaws, to the brokenness of their life and what they ultimately desire. So when we look at this passage, let's just take the motivations one by one and see how each one points to Jesus Christ. They cried out, we want to be like other nations. Now, there was something in them saying, if we want to be like other nations, that means they've got something we don't have. They've got power. They've got reputation. They've got technology. They've got land. They've got whatever that may be. They are looking outside of themselves, saying there's somebody else who has something that I want. And in this life, when we talk with people, when you address the desires of their heart, even if they're indifferent to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Recently, I taught and then talked with my small group about what do you do when somebody's indifferent, that they don't care to the gospel, to hear the gospel. Well, my answer for that is if someone's indifferent to the gospel, find what they're passionate about. Find out what they're passionate about, and then use that as a segue into the need for the gospel. So when they are crying out to be like other nations, it means they're passionate about looking like someone else. There's something someone else has. Well, when we do evangelism, when we talk with people, we want to find out what are they most concerned about. Their concern may not be death and what happens after we die. That may not be the conversation you may need to have with them. Their concern may not be is there a God. They may believe in a God. Their concern may be morality and why is there evil in the world. Well, then that means that's the track that you need to walk down with them, and some questions that you might need to engage with them and hopefully answer. And so you find out, what are they passionate about? Well, these individuals are passionate about looking like other people, which means they did not have an identity that they were closely focused on and secure in. And what Jesus does for us is, the very first thing he does when he saves us is he brings us a new identity. When I'm talking with someone, usually the gospel conversation leads into a discussion on the brokenness of our own lives and our identity. And so what these Israelites needed, they needed to be reminded, hey, you want to be like other nations? You need to stop and realize you're not called to be like other nations. You are the special treasure, the apple of God's eye. You are loved. And to remind them of their past, what God had done for them, taking them out of Egypt, made them an instrument of God's glory, walking them through the wilderness. And even when they came into the promised land, other armies were scared of them because they had heard the stories. Israel had forgotten their special relationship with God, and so in wanting to be like other nations, they were forsaking who they really were. And when I talk with people today who struggle with homosexuality or transgenderism, or struggle with relationships, or struggle with substance abuse, or struggle with all these things that they're seeking after, it reveals to me a brokenness not only of their heart but of their understanding, that they don't realize God has provided so much more. Even the debate on with teenagers on sex before marriage or sex outside of marriage, they will say, well, this is good though. But no, it's not. The reason that you're tempted by that is because you don't realize God has given you something better. It's not just that he's saying no at this time. He's saying no because I've got something better for you. And you can take that for anything. When we talk about substances, is it okay to get drunk? Is it okay to do these things? Well, to give yourself over to those substances is to show that you have not fully understood that God has something better for you. And so God gives us in Christ a new identity. That if we would understand who we are in Christ, if we would see ourselves for how God sees us, we wouldn't want the things of this world. So motivation one, that they want to be like all nations. Listen, we in our own hearts, when we want to be like others, we've got to realize Christ is better and Christ has something better for us. Second, it says that our King may judge us. They did not want God to be their judge. They were tired of the cycle, the sin cycle where they would reject God and then be overthrown by another nation. But listen, this is where we share. There is a standard of righteousness. When we in talking about evangelism, when we confront people with their sin, most often they'll say, wait, I'm not a bad person compared to so and so. And we've got to be honest with them. We've got to share our affront of sin, or our affront to God cannot be measured by our sin against others. We have sinned against a holy God. Yes, in comparison, we may look better than other people. We can compare our sin with others and come out on top, but God is the one that we have turned against. God is the one that we have rebelled against. God is the one we have offended. And so what we want to do in sharing the gospel is remind them we are sinners and we deserve a place called hell. We deserve punishment. And so when they are crying out, we want our King to be judge over us, meaning we want somebody like us who will take it a little easy on us. You don't want that. In fact, I'll illustrate it like this. If there was a judge sitting on a bench who was deciding a case where your loved one had been murdered, and that judge looks at the defendant who is guilty and says, you know what, I realize you've done this, but I'm going to let you go. You're not that bad a guy. And he pronounced him not guilty. We would be irate. We would be upset. We would demand the judge no longer serve in that capacity because he would be unjust. And like that, and even more so, when we try to try to do away with sin, or have a low view of the consequences of sin or what sin really is, then we have done the same thing. We have forgotten that sin is deadly, and we need a righteous judge on us. But again, that in the gospel story, the judge for us has made a way of salvation for us. And so this is where that third motivation, and we want our King to go out before us and fight our battles. When we share the gospel, we remind them, hey, God has made you, created you special. God has made you his own creation, put his image on you. He is our judge. If he's creator, then we play by his rules. He's judge. But God has not left us alone to go to hell and be separated from him. God has actually fought our greatest battle against our sinful flesh, and he did so by Christ going to the cross. And so when I'm able to share that good news with them, I tell them, your greatest battle is sin, and you need a Savior, and his name is Jesus. And we talk about how Christ faced that battle by going to the cross, and he died, was buried, rose again, and he won the battle, was victorious. And we can trust that our King is greater than King Saul, King David, King Solomon, King Rehoboam, and on down the list. Our King is greater than any president or queen or king. Our King is greater than ourselves. We can trust that Jesus Christ is who he says he is, the Son of the living God. And so these are ways that you can share the gospel. Our passage, 1 Samuel chapter 8, is a gospel-centered passage because it points us to the truth of Jesus being our true King. As we close out today's episode of Evangelism, we always want to look at a moment in church history, and our moment in church history comes in AD 529 with the establishment of Benedict's monastic order. Now, this may seem strange to you thinking about monasticism or the monks, Society of the Monks, but this is a very important piece of history in our in Christianity, in our lives. When Christianity was legalized and the threat of persecution was gone, many people were coming to Christ, or coming to, whether it be true Christianity or a cultural Christianity. Several were giving their lives to the ministry. And during this time, there were many who took particular direction of poverty and separation from the culture. And one of those was Benedict. Benedict of Nursia started what we know as European monasticism. He was born to a very wealthy Italian family and was studying in Rome. But as he was in Rome, he saw that the culture was just very immoral, even the Christian culture, very immoral and wasteful, frivolous in many ways. So he left and he became a hermit. And as he became a hermit, he took for himself this identity of poverty. Well, many families saw him and respected him, loved him for that. And so they started sending their sons to him and said, hey, we want you to disciple or teach our sons. And as they did this, they found out, wait a second, he's very strict. He's not allowing certain things. And so even when you read some of the stories about Benedict, you find that even some of his students became so upset with him, they tried to poison him and kill him. So he leaves and he hides in a cave and spends some time by himself. And he comes to realize that, not everybody's made for the monastic life, and maybe I could be a little easier on some things. But ultimately, he moves to Monte Cassino and he destroys a pagan temple and built a monastery there. But he begins, as other people are coming to him, to train some of these young men. and he creates what many have called a spiritual fortress, where men can come and stay there and not be tempted by the things of this world. They can work, they can till the ground, they can be a self-supported community with their own fields and workshops. And so as he's there and people come to him, he requires them first that before they engage in true monastery life or monkish living, that they take a year, and that they would spend a year with him to see if this is really what they're supposed to do. And if they pass through the year, then they would take 3 vows. The first is a vow of poverty, in which they relinquish all of their personal goods. The second is a vow of chastity, where they renounce sexual relationships. And then a third, a vow of obedience, where if they are to stay there, they're going to obey the monastic leaders. And in this, he sets up a daily disciplined schedule of worship 7 times during the day. Each there'd be a service of about 20 minutes long. This would start at 2 a.m. with a vigil service, and they would have public worship. They would have a life of work and prayer, and to some it may be very tedious, but he viewed this as a very disciplined way to focus on Christ and focus on the good things of Christ. Some have come against the monastic life in saying that there's no impact on the culture around it. Some have said we need to push even more towards that. But I simply wanted to share with you that this was a huge moment in Christianity. In 529, it began a movement that in many places still exists, and it definitely had its impact on the Christian world. We'll even see that as we continue through church history each week, in several hundred years later, that it's the monasteries that would actually provide for us some of the greatest teachings and revivals of Christian foundations for our faith at certain dark periods of our time. So St. Benedict definitely had his mark on Christianity, and the point for him was to be a light in this dark world. And to be covered from the darkness of the world. The point for us, though, especially as we read 1 Samuel, is to be reminded that we have a king. His name is Jesus, and we don't want to be like other nations, other people. We don't want to be like other groups. We want to be the children of God, proclaiming He is our judge, He is our king, and He fights for us. So as we close out, remember, evangelism is not complete until the evangelized become the evangelist. May we be obedient to God's call to missions. I love you. I'm praying for you. Stakes in the ground.